Hello and welcome to a very special episode of Lost in the Dark podcast. My name is Burton, and tonight we will be doing episode 2 in our new series called Heavy Metal Folklore. In this series, we take a look at folklore and myths surrounding different bands, or how they maybe it's just where they got their name, or actually myths about the bands and things like that. Our first episode was on the Black Dahlia Murders, and so basically the folklore surrounding and the true crime story behind where children of Bodom got their name. Tonight is a similar deal. Tonight we will be exploring where one of my all-time favorite bands got their name, Michigan's own the Black Dahlia Murder, and the true crime surrounding one of America's most notorious unsolved murders. Let's dive right in, shall we? So on the morning of January 15th, 1947, the body of Elizabeth Short was found in a vacant lot in Leimert Park in Los Angeles, California. She was found by Betty Bersinger, who at around 10 a.m. on January 15th, while she was going on a walk with her 3-year-old daughter. At first, she thought it was a discarded mannequin until further investigation. She thought it was a discarded mannequin because of how porcelain white the skin was. But when she got closer, she realized it was actually a body, ran to the nearest home to phone the police. Elizabeth Short was 22 years old and born on July 29th, 1924. She was a native of Boston and moved back and forth a lot with family between family in Florida due to chronic illness and bronchitis and lung infections. She actually had a lung surgery when she was only 15 years old. And keep in mind, this is the late 20s, early 30s. So she moving to Florida to get out of the harsher climate during the winter months of Boston and Massachusetts was actually like a treatment for her illness. Now, her father ran a mini golf business until the stock market crashed in 1929. In 1930, his car was found abandoned, and everyone assumed that he committed suicide by jumping into a river due to the loss of business. In 1942, so 12 years later, her mother received a letter of apology from the presumed dead father, saying he had been alive this whole time and lived in California. Elizabeth Short, now 18, not having seen her father since she was 6, so for 12 years, very formative years, moved to California to live with her dad. Now, arguments between them caused her to move out by January 1943, and she lived with friends for a while, and even with an Air Force base sergeant who reportedly may have abused her, and she left in mid-1943 for Santa Barbara. On September 23, 1943, she was arrested for underage drinking, and the authorities sent her back to Massachusetts, but she never went back to Massachusetts. She actually went to Florida. And while she was in Florida, she met Matthew Michael Gordon Jr., a decorated Army Air Force officer, and they met and fell in love. But he was deployed during World War II, and while he was recovering from a plane crash in India during World War II, he wrote his intentions to marry her when he got home, and she wrote back that she accepted his proposal. However, he would never make it home. In 1945, on August 10th, he suffered a second plane crash that killed him. Broken, she relocated back to Los Angeles in July 1946. Short was known for being a socialite, often hanging out, dating lots of men, and the press even would end up going as far to call her a prostitute and stripper. However, there was, and I'm going to end up repeating this a few times, there was no actual evidence that supports that whatsoever. That is a made-up narrative by the press at the time, and trust me, we will get into that. During her time in Los Angeles before she died, she had many odd jobs as a waitress, and in the last 9 months of her life, she moved 8 different times. Okay? So, she, There were a lot of reports that she was difficult to live with. She was not a very at home. She was not a very put together person. However, when she was out, and by all accounts of everyone who encountered her, out in the world and stuff, she was a very like well dressed, put together woman. She took a lot of care in all of that. But however, back to the discovery of her body. That was just to give you a little bit of a background on who she was in her life and in the kind of life she had up to the time leading to her death. Short's severely mutilated body was completely severed at the waist, drained entirely of blood, leaving her skin pale white. Medical examiners determined that she had been dead for around 10 hours prior to the discovery, leaving her time of death either sometime during the evening of January 14th or the early morning hours of January 15th. The body had obviously been washed by the killer. Short's face had been slashed from the corners of her mouth to her ears, creating the effect known as the Glasgow smile. Also, the Chelsea grin. Note to another metal band. She had several cuts on her thighs and breasts where entire portions of flesh had been sliced away. The lower half of her body was positioned a foot away from the upper half. Remember, she was literally cut in half, and her intestines had been tucked neatly beneath her buttocks. The corpse had been posed with her hands over her head, her elbows bent at right angles, and her legs spread apart. So yeah, she had been cut in half in the two halves with the Glasgow. Some say the Joker smile, but the Joker wasn't from the ear to the lips. It was more like halfway, you know what I mean? But yeah, that was the condition of her body when it was found. Now, similar to the Lake Bodom, this is something that these are the only two. Full disclosure, these are the first two unsolved true crimes I've ever gone this deep in researching personally, and they both have a few things in common as to why they might be unsolved, in my opinion. Similarly to the Lake Bodom murders, there were a lot of problems with the investigation, starting with the fact that upon discovery of the body, a crowd of both passerby and reporters began to gather. And Los Angeles Herald-Express reporter Aggie Underwood was among the first to arrive at the scene and took several photos of the corpse and crime scene near the body. Detectives located a heel print on the ground amid the tire tracks, and a cement sack containing watery blood was also found nearby, which was believed to be part in the transportation of the body. But the point here is that in this case, like the Lake Bodom murders, onlookers and press showed up before the cops. So they were contaminating the crime scene before the police were able to arrive and cordon off an area and gather evidence. So that's something to be taken into consideration. It's very similar to the Lake Bodom murders. Also, I mentioned earlier, again, that she was promoted as a prostitute in the press. Now, I want to talk about, this is where we're going to talk about the press. There is no evidence to support this claim, and the press turned her into somewhat of a warning to others. And I'll get to that. Understand, this happened fresh off the cuff of World War II. Like I said, her fiance, who was killed in a plane crash before he ever got a chance to come home and get married to her. That plane crash happened 1 week before Japan surrendered, ending the war. And this was this story, the Black Dahlia Murder, was the first huge story of this nature after the war. It got huge national attention, especially due to how gruesome the murder was. Stories of the Black Dahlia, stories like the newspapers were selling more copies because of this case than they did when Japan bombed Pearl Harbor. Just to give you an idea of the gravity of this, okay? This was a sensation of the time. And it was also a giant money-making time for the press, okay? She was prompted as a warning in the sense that the press was trying to promote this narrative, trying to push this sort of idea of, if you're a beautiful young girl wanting to seek fame in California, be warned. This could happen to you. kind of a thing. Now, step back and look at this for a minute. Now we have a case where in a specific example where we actually know the press is making up, literally lying, like making up false information and pushing a false narrative based on fear, especially, but based on that, to sell papers. They're trying to sell as many of these fucking papers as they can. And guess what? This fits a profile. Not only does it fit a profile, there is a man behind this narrative. There's a man behind these press companies who has done this sort of thing before. None other than William Randolph Hearst, the same man responsible for Reefer Madness and lying to the American public to make cannabis illegal so that he could continue to profit from his paper mills. Except in this case, the sick son of a bitch takes it one horrifying step farther. Prior to the autopsy, police now this is actually pretty crazy. Police were able to identify Elizabeth Short as the victim quickly because they actually sent copies of her fingerprints using something called sound photo, which is just a really, really primitive fax machine of the area. So this is a really, like, technologically speaking, they were like pulling out every stop they could think of to get this investigation going and to positively ID this victim. So the prints came up as a match because, like I said earlier, she was arrested in 1943 for underage drinking, and they did fingerprint her during that arrest, so they were able to match those fingerprints. And immediately following her identification, reporters from William Randolph Hearst's Los Angeles Examiner contacted her mother, Phoebe Short, in Boston, and told her that her daughter had won a beauty contest. Let that sit for a second. They just positively ID'd her as this murder victim, so they call her mother to tell her that Elizabeth had won a beauty contest. And they did this to pry as much personal information about Elizabeth out of her mother, Phoebe, that they could. They literally said, yeah, your daughter won a beauty contest. Give us all this information. So they pulled as much information out of her as they could. And then when they couldn't get anything else, they said, actually, your daughter didn't win a beauty contest. She was brutally murdered. That's the kind of man William Randolph Hearst was. If you had any doubt about what a sick son of a bitch that guy was, Jesus Christ. She actually didn't believe the reporters when they told her that, and the news had to be broken to her again by a police officer. So sickening. When I learned that, I was like, you gotta be fucking shitting me. That blew my mind. That one really blew my mind. Yeah, then the newspaper offered to pay her mother like airfare and accommodations to come to Los Angeles and help the police with the investigation. But get this, it was all bullshit. They actually kept her away from the police. They kept her mother away from the police so she couldn't help with the investigation to protect the paper's own story. Insane. The Examiner, another Hearst newspaper, and the Los Angeles Herald-Express later sensationalized the case with one article from the Examiner describing the black tailored suit Short was last seen wearing as a tight skirt and sheer blouse. The media nicknamed her the Black Dahlia and described her as adventurous who prowled Hollywood Boulevard. Additional newspaper reports, such as one published in the Los Angeles Times on January 17th, deemed the murders as a sex fiend slang. Now, the media did in fact start calling her the Black Dahlia, but there are different rumors of where that name was coined. That is very true. I was actually not able to find any definitive source of where that name actually originates. I've read some reports that say BD was carved into her body. I've read other reports that say it's something like reporters picked it up during an investigation, interviewing like a bartender or a store owner or something that she used to regular, and told them that people used to call her the Black Dahlia, and but it was a reference to a recent film called the Blue Dahlia. So yeah, there's no definitive statement on where that name actually originates, but those are a few of the different theories. Now on with this. So like I said already, this investigation from the get-go was silly because the police were not the first on the scene. And then on January 21st, 1947, a person claiming to be Short's killer placed a phone call to the office of James Richardson, the editor of the Examiner, congratulating Richardson on the newspaper's coverage of the case, and stated he planned on eventually turning himself in, but not before allowing police to pursue him further. Additionally, the caller told Richardson to accept some souvenirs of Beth Short, or expect some souvenirs of Beth Short in the mail. Then, on January 24th, a suspicious mail envelope was discovered by U.S. Postal Service worker. The envelope had been addressed to the Los Angeles Examiner and the other Los Angeles papers, with individual words that had been cut and pasted from a newspaper clippings. Additionally, a large message on the face of the envelope read, "Here's Dahlia's belongings. Letter to follow." The envelope contained Short's birth certificate, business cards, photographs, names written on pieces of paper, and an address book with the name Mark Hansen embossed on the cover. The packet had been carefully cleaned with gasoline, similarly to Short's body. Now, again, with Short's body, it was meticulously cleaned, like I said here, with gasoline to remove any fingerprints. This was something that they apparently did back then, which led police to suspect that the packet had been sent directly by her killer, because that was not something that they had published, I don't think, yet. Despite the efforts to clean the packet, several partial fingerprints were able to be lifted from the envelope and sent to the FBI for testing. However, the prints were compromised in transit and thus could not be analyzed. The same day the packet was received by the Examiner, a handbag and black suede shoe were reportedly to have been seen on top of a garbage can in an alley a short distance from Norton Avenue, 2 miles from where Short's body had been discovered. The items were recovered by police, but they had been wiped clean with gasoline, destroying any fingerprints. So, police quickly deemed Mark Hansen, the owner of the address book found in the packet of they determined him a suspect. Hansen was he was a wealthy nightclub owner and a theater owner, an acquaintance at whose home Short had stayed with friends. And according to some sources, he also confirmed that the purse and shoe discovered in the alley were in fact Short's. Ann Toth, Short's friend and roommate, told investigators that Short had recently rejected sexual advances from Hansen and suggested it as a potential cause for him to have killed her. However, he was cleared of suspicion in the case. In addition to Hansen, the LAPD interviewed over 150 men in the upcoming weeks they believed to be potential suspects. And this is another part where the investigation gets wild. Okay, so they looked at Hansen as a suspect, but ultimately they were not. He was never arrested. No one has ever been arrested for this murder, and he actually passed a bunch of polygraph tests and stuff like that. Now, a total of so they had Hansen as a suspect, but the investigation just blew up almost out of their control, and they had so many different things going on. They actually ended up offering a $10,000 reward for information, and after the announcement of that reward, people came forward with all kinds of confessions, but pretty much all of them were quickly deemed as false. Then, on January 26, another letter was received by the Examiner, this time handwritten. It read, "Here it is, turning in Wednesday, January 29th, 10 a.m. Had my fun at police. Black Dahlia Avenger," is how it ended. The letter also named a location at which the supposed killer would turn himself in. Police waited, but no killer showed up. Instead, at 1 p.m., the Examiner received another cut and pasted letter which read, have changed my mind. You would not give me a square deal. Dahlia killing was justified. End quote. Now, with how fucking fucked up the murder was, with how gruesome the murder was, and the letters being sent to the press, there was a media frenzy around this story like no other. All right, it was one of the most heavily covered stories at that point of all time, and the press actually, or the police actually allowed a lot of what we would call today fake news to be reported. So that way they could know if any confessions were bullshit or not. All right? Like a lot of, which also contributes to all the different theories about this case. You know what I mean? With how many newspapers were reporting false information, it allowed for a lot of different theories to be created about it. One of which was that she was heavily tortured for hours prior to her death. However, there was no actual evidence to support that, and in fact, the true cause of death was cerebral hemorrhage. And that was kept from the public. Other reports that were heavily publicized, like I said, were about her being a stripper. An acquaintance of her told police that she liked to get guys worked up over her and leave them hanging dry, end quote. This led to some reporters and detectives to look into the possibility that she was a lesbian, but that even was quickly found to be not true. All those claims remained unsubstantiated. But then the Herald Express also received several letters from the purported killer, again made with cut and paste clippings, one of which read, quote, "I will give up Dahlia killing if I get 10 years. Don't try to find me," end quote. On February 1st, the Los Angeles Daily News reported that the case had run into a stone wall with no new leads for investigators to pursue. The Examiner continued to run stories on the murder investigation, which was front page news for 35 days following the discovery of the body. When interviewed, lead investigator Captain Jack Donahue told the press that he believed Short's murder had taken place in a remote building or a shack on the outskirts of Los Angeles, and her body transported into the city where it was disposed of. Based on the precise cuts and dissection of the corpse, like I said earlier, the LAPD looked into the possibility that the murderer was a surgeon or someone with medical knowledge. But still, like even with that lead, it ended up yielding no results. Now, there are a few other like kind of fake things like that you'll come across a lot when researching this. A lot of people talk about a missing week that she had. The week nobody knew where she was leading up to her death. And there are a lot of people that came forward with supposed sightings of her and information about that week, but pretty much all of them were proved to be bullshit. Now, her whereabouts leading up to the day of the discovery of her body, a few days at least, are unknown to this day. So there is some mystery surrounding that still. Now, after the discovery of her body, numerous papers reported that she had been tortured leading up to her death and things like that. It was denied by law enforcement. Another thing you'll find when researching this is that she was forced to eat during the autopsy. It suggested that she was forced to eat feces during her torture, but the claim has been denied, and there's no indication of this in Short's official autopsy. So those are some of the kind of like myths surrounding, some of the artificial stories that the police let the papers run, so that that way it would give them a way to pick out the bullshit confessions and stuff like that. Now, on to the suspects. Like the Lake Bodom murders, and like I said earlier, likely part of the reason why this case remains unsolved today, in my opinion at least, is because of this, how many suspects there were, how many fake confessions there were. It's just such a the Lake Bodom murders to this day is the most notorious unsolved case in Finland's history, I believe. In this, is probably pretty close for American standard, except in America. So the intensity and the pressure of solving it and going through all the evidence and everything was gigantic, and it was a clusterfuck essentially. Both cases were a giant clusterfuck from the get-go, and I think that really contributes to both of them remaining officially unsolved. But during the actual time of the murder, a few of the top suspects were, besides the one I already mentioned, Mark Hansen, a doctor named Walter Bailey, proposed by the former Times copy editor Larry Harnish, Times publisher Norman Chandler, whom biographer Donald Wolfe claims impregnated Short, Leslie Dillon, Joseph A. Dumas, R.D. Lane, a.k.a. Jeff Connors, Mark Henson, Dr. Francis E. Sweeney, George Hodel, which we will get into later, Hodel's friend Fred Sexton, George Knowlton, Robert M. Red Manley, Patrick O'Reilly, and Jack Anderson Wilson. Out of 60 confessions the police received, they only ever considered 25 to be possible. However, to date, 500 people have confessed. Some weren't even born when she was murdered, just to give you an idea of the gravity of the clusterfuck that we're dealing with here. One officer was even quoted in saying, "It's amazing how many people want to turn in their family members." Now, I want to give a focus on a few of the suspects, because in the research I did for this, I listened to some other podcasts and things like that, read the Wikipedia page. Some of this is from the Wikipedia page, and things like that. But I want to give a focus to some of the suspects that I found most interesting, at least. First up, Mark Hansen. Okay, like I said, Short and him lived together for a little bit, and on Hansen, Short lived with Hansen and his girlfriend, Ann Toth. And Short called Hansen from San Diego on January 8th, making him one of the last known people to have spoken to her. They indicated Hansen made contradictory statements to the authorities about the nature of his conversation, and an address book with his name embossed on the cover was sent in the mail, like I said, to the LA Examiner as some of Short's personal effects, and it was sent to them by someone claiming to be the killer. However, he said it was something he just gave to her and he never used it, so he just gave it to her, and Short had been using it as her own. And the DA files also indicate that Hansen had tried to seduce Short but was rebuffed. He was one of the first serious suspects in the case and was still a prime suspect as of late 1951. Hansen was also linked to 3 other suspects, each of whom was a medical doctor, Dr. Patrick O'Reilly and Dr. M.M. Schwartz, and Dr. Arthur McGinnis fought. Buzz Williams, a retired detective with the Long Beach Police Department, wrote an article for the LBPD newsletter, The Rap Sheet, in 2000 on Elizabeth Schwartz's murder. Williams' father, Richard F. Williams, and his friend Con Keller were both members of the LA Gangster Squad investigating the case. Keller believed Mark Hansen was the killer and said Hansen was Swedish and had spent some of his time at Sweden's medical surgical school. Hansen was actually born in Denmark, which would explain the precise dissection of Short's body. Keller also said that Hansen had elaborate parties at his Hollywood boarding house, and members of the Los Angeles Police Department, along with the chief of detectives, Thad Brown, and his brother Finis Brown, attended and later aided Hansen in a cover-up. Williams mentioned that Hansen owned a Ford Lincoln Mercury car lot on Hollywood Boulevard, and his LAPD friends were later coincidentally driving around town in brand new Lincoln cars. Hansen died of natural causes in 1964, and no charges were ever brought against him. He had no criminal record and no known history of violence. LA Police Chief William Wharton told the LA Examiner that there was absolutely no case against Hansen. Hansen's great-granddaughter Helen Alexis Yonov was interviewed for Pio Eatwell's upcoming documentary on the Black Dahlia for NBC Peacock Productions. It's an old documentary. Popular accounts of the Black Dahlia case often portray Hansen as having connections to organized crime, but there is no evidence for this either. Now, but he was being investigated by the Gangster Squad, and they're actually, if you dig deeper into that, there is some interesting stuff, like an actual location of murder potentially at a hotel, and some of the members of the Gangster Squad even claim that Hansen more or less confessed to the crime. Now, on to Dr. George Hill Hodel Jr. This is a real interesting one, and the reason why I want to mention it is because it's got some pretty current pop culture stuff going on. So this might be something that you come across if you decide to investigate this yourself. He came under police scrutiny on October 1949 when his 14-year-old daughter Tamar accused him of molesting her. Despite 3 witnesses testifying that they had seen Hodel having sex with Tamar, he was acquitted in December 1949. The trial led the LAPD to include Hodel, a physician specializing in sexually transmitted disease, among its many suspects in the Dahlia case. Police put Hodel under surveillance from February 18th to March 27th, 1950, to ascertain whether he would be implicated in the murder. Some of the surviving transcripts and micro recordings, Hodel was heard making highly incriminating statements. Quote, "Suppose I did kill the Black Dahlia. They couldn't prove it now. They can't talk to my secretary because she's dead. They thought there was something fishy anyway. Now they've figured it out. Killed her. Maybe I did kill my secretary." End quote. Pretty erratic speech style. The secretary referred to was Ruth Spalding, who police had previously suspected of being murdered by Hodel in 1945. He was present when Spalding overdosed and had burnt some of her papers before police were called. The case was dropped owing lack of evidence, but documents were later found that indicated Spaulding was about to publicly accuse Hodel of intentionally misdiagnosing patients and billing them for laboratory tests, medical treatments, and prescriptions not needed. Hodel's son, former this is where it gets interesting. Hodel's son, former LAPD homicide detective Steve Hodel, believes Short may have been one of his father's patients. In the final report to the grand jury dated February 20th, 1951, Lieutenant Frank Jemison of the Los Angeles County DA's office wrote, Dr. George Hodel, MD, at the time of this murder, had a clinic at East 1st Street near Alameda. Lillian Denoric, who lived with the doctor, said he spent some of his time around the Biltmore Hotel and identified the photo of victim Short as photo of one of the doctor's girlfriends. Tamar Hodel, 15-year-old daughter, stated that her mother, Dorothy Hodel, had told her that her father had been out all night at a party the night of the murder and said they'll never be able to prove that I did that murder. 2 microphones were placed in the suspect's home. Informant Lillian Denoric had been committed to the state mental institution at Camarillo. Joe Barrett, a roomer at the Hodel residence, cooperated as an informant. A photograph of the suspect in the nude with a nude identified model was secured from his personal effects. Undersigned identified the model as Maddie Comfort. And yeah, it just kind of, honestly, the rest of that actual transcript just kind of goes on from there. But lots of strangeness with Hodel for sure. Now, in 2003, his son Steve Hodel published a book, The Black Dahlia Avenger, A Genius for Murder, in which he claimed his father, who died in 1999, had murdered Elizabeth Short and was responsible for other unsolved killings over 2 decades. Steve had seen 2 pictures in his father's photo album that claims resemble Short, although her family insists they are not of her, and many other observers have failed to see the resemblance. Since beginning his investigation, Steve located and identified one of the photographic subjects as a former friend of George Hodel. The other photograph remains unidentified. Steve claims he was unaware at the time that his father had been a suspect, although his sister Tamar was friends with Janice Knowlton, author of her own book, Daddy Was the Black Dahlia Killer. And case documents make it clear that Steve's parents and many of their associates knew George Hodel was a suspect. After reviewing the information presented in Steve's book, head deputy DA Stephen Kay proclaimed the case solved. But others have noted that he had formed this conclusion by treating Steve's many disputed assertions as established fact. Detective Brian Carr, the LAPD officer in charge of the Black Dahlia case at the time of Steve's briefing, said in a television interview that he was baffled by Kay's response. In a September 2006 television interview, Carr added, "I don't have the time to either prove or disprove Hodel's investigation. I'm too busy working on active cases," end quote. In 2009, Hodel published Most Evil Avenger, Zodiac, and the further serial murders of Dr. George Hill Hodel, in which he claimed that his father was also the Zodiac killer. So, yeah. I actually heard an interview with him earlier, and, he does present a compelling case. He claims to have some wild evidence, but, I don't see any of it in any of my research. You know what I mean? and it's a little bit disputed. But the reason why I specifically actually wanted to mention him is because there is a miniseries either coming out or already out starring Chris Pine called I Am the Night, which is kind of based on the Black Dahlia murder and the Dr. George Hill Hodel theory. However, if you go to Steve Hodel's website, he continues to update the case with additional discovered information. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the other suspect, or the other suspect I want to talk about, the more recent one, the last one, is not Janice Knowlton, a woman who was 10 years old at the time of Short's murder, claimed that she witnessed her father, George Knowlton, beat Short to death with a claw hammer in the detached garage of her family's home in Westminster. She also published a book titled Dahlia Was the Black Dahlia Killer in 1995. She has made additional claims that her father sexually molested her, but the book has been condemned as well. And like I said earlier, one of the detectives was surprised at how many people wanted to turn in family members. And here, even today, we have two of the two more notable cases or suspects of family members turning in their family members. Yeah. Now, some of the other theories included in the Hodel theory and some others is that there are related crimes, like the Cleveland torso murders and the Chicago lipstick murders. If you look those up, those are both similar MOs and relatively similar time frames to the Dahlia. It would make sense, in other words. Now, here's what I think about this Dahlia case. Well, first of all, I think they were right in their assumption that it could be someone with a medical background. The body, the way it was, what was done to it, does take medical knowledge to do, I would think. Because I don't have any fucking medical knowledge. I don't know how to do that shit. So I would assume, at the very least. And I also find, this is the 40s, all right? They don't have serial killer profiling yet. And knowing what we know today about serial killers, this doesn't feel like an only kill. This is not a crime of passion. That's not what that they don't give Glasgow smiles and cut people in half in a crime and drain all their blood and leave them posed in a crime of passion. That doesn't happen. This seems like the work of a serial killer, but yet it was never really looked at, which is why they've potentially connected it to the Chicago lipstick murders and the Cleveland torso murders. So yeah, and in the Hodel theory, Stephen Hodel suggests, and that's the other thing. That's kind of the other strange part about this case, is that it got so much media attention. It was not the only murder that took place in L.A., not even the only gruesome murder of a beautiful young woman at the time. Like there were many others in Hodel. So Steve Hodel connects up to 9 in the area to his dad at the time, before he goes on to the Zodiac and all that stuff. Another unsolved case. So yeah, I don't know why I think it was just the time period. They didn't really understand serial killers at that point in time, so they probably just never looked into it really much for that reason, I would guess. But hard to say, honestly. Because they did have I think the first time there was any sort of profile developed for a serial killer, it was for Jack the Ripper in the London Ripper case. Which is another case we'll be looking into when we discuss Whitechapel. So yeah. Also, like I said, they got the I Am the Night coming out. And then the Black Dahlia Murder movie starring Scarlett Johansson came out. Anthrax has a song called Black Dahlia Murder. And, of course, the band themselves, the Black Dahlia Murder, have many songs about murder. Some of which are, of course, about this case. So yeah, that's the folklore, the true crime legend behind where the band, one of my all-time favorite bands, the band the Black Dahlia Murder, gets their name. And that'll be it for episode 2 of our Heavy Metal Folklore series. I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. I tell you what, it takes some time to put together this research, but it's a lot of fun doing it, that's for sure. I really do enjoy it, and I hope you are too. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, on YouTube. Also, while you're on there, if you feel like it, give us a like, give us a subscribe, even leave a comment. Also on iTunes, any review that you have would be wonderful, positive or negative. I'm down for either. We've been lucky so far. A lot of our comments and stuff have been positive, and we really appreciate that. And I absolutely love you all who listen to this. So yeah, if you give us a follow or shoot us an email if you have anything you want to talk about, a true crime episode, or not a true crime, a heavy metal folklore episode that you would like us to go over, something we haven't covered yet in the first 2 episodes. We have many more to come. Or even a paranormal experience you may have had, or any of the above, shoot us an email, lostinthedarkpodcast@gmail.com. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for getting lost with me tonight. I hope you enjoyed this special episode. I love you all to death. Good night.